I made one mistake with my money that had nothing to do with a bad investment or a scam. I simply told the wrong person a number. Just one number. 8 months later, that single sentence had quietly drained a little over $8,000 out of my life. And the worst part? I handed it over willingly, smiling the whole time. Let me be specific, because specificity is the only thing that makes this useful. The number I said out loud was $41,000. That was my savings after 4 years of doing everything the internet told me to do. I packed lunches. I drove a paid-off 2014 Corolla with 130,000 miles on it. I skipped the trips, the upgrades, the little dopamine purchases that make a hard week feel survivable. I made $71,000 a year before tax, which after taxes and rent and the ordinary friction of being alive left me clawing my way to that $41,000 one boring deposit at a time. And I was proud of it. That's the part one need you to feel, because pride is exactly what set the trap. I wanted someone to know. I wanted one person to see the thing I'd built quietly, and to nod, and to say, that's impressive. So I told one person, and within a year, that number wasn't $41,000 anymore. It was closer to $33,000. Nothing was stolen. No emergency hit. I gave every dollar away in pieces so small I never once felt the wound. Stay with me, because the reason this happened isn't greed, and it isn't stupidity, and it isn't a bad friend. It's something structural, something almost nobody points out until it's already cost them. And once you see it, you'll never say your number out loud the same way again. Here's the counterintuitive part. The thing that took me the whole $8,000 to understand. The moment a number leaves your mouth, it stops being a fact about you and becomes a fact about your relationship with the person hearing it. You think you're sharing information. You're actually redrawing a map. You've just shown someone where the water is. And people who are thirsty, even good people, even people who love you, will find their way toward water. Not out of malice, out of gravity. The person I told was someone I'll call Danish. A close friend, genuinely kind. The guy who'd help you move on a Sunday without complaining. I trusted him completely, and that trust was well placed. Danish never schemed. He never manipulated me. And that's the point I most need you to understand, because if the villain of this story were an obvious con artist, it would let you off the hook. You'd tell yourself you'd have seen it coming. You wouldn't. The damage here came from something far quieter than betrayal. It came from the way information changes behavior, on both sides, the instant it's shared. Watch what happened. Because it happened in slow motion. About 3 weeks after I told him, Danish's car transmission died. A real emergency, not a fake one. He needed $1,500 to keep his job, because no car meant no commute meant no paycheck. And here's the thing. Before he knew my number, he would never have asked me. He'd have gone to a credit union, taken the loan, paid the 11% interest, and figured it out like people do. But now he knew. He knew I had $41,000 sitting there. And so the ask came, gently, apologetically, framed as temporary. Just till I'm back on my feet. And I said yes, because how do you say no to a friend in a real crisis when you both know the money exists? I never saw that $1,500 again. Not because Danish is a thief, but because life is a series of transmissions dying. Something always comes up. The repayment kept getting pushed, and eventually we both stopped mentioning it, because mentioning it felt uglier than just letting it go. That's loss number one. And if it had stopped there, this would be a small story. It didn't stop there. Here's the part everyone misses. Once you've said yes once, you've done something invisible and permanent. You've reclassified yourself. In that person's mind, you are no longer someone who has money. You are someone whose money is available. Those are completely different categories. And you cross from one to the other the first time you open the account for anyone but yourself. After the car, there was a security deposit for a new apartment, then a medical bill that insurance fought, then a stretch where his hours got cut and he was just a little short on rent, twice. Each one was real. Each one was small relative to $41,000. And each one was, in the moment, impossible to refuse without feeling like I was choosing money over a person I loved. Added up and it was a little over $8,000 across 8 months. None of it came back. And I want to be honest about something, because the shame rule of this whole story is the most important part. It would be easy to sit here and call myself a pushover, or call him a user, and file the whole thing under a character flaw. But that's the wrong diagnosis, and the wrong diagnosis keeps you stuck. This wasn't a discipline failure. It was a sequencing failure. I disclosed before I'd built a single boundary. And boundaries you try to build after someone already knows your number are boundaries that read as rejection. You cannot install a fence after you've already shown someone the yard and invited them to walk through it. The mistake wasn't generosity. The mistake was disclosure without architecture. And that mistake is invisible until someone points it out. There's a concept behind this that goes deeper than my dumb $8,000. and it's worth grounding in something real. Economists have a term for what happens when one party in a relationship suddenly has information about another's resources. It shifts the entire negotiating position, silently, before a single word is spoken. And there's hard data on the social side of this. A 2023 Bankrate survey found that the vast majority of people who lend money to friends or family experience a negative consequence from it, whether that's losing the money, damaging the relationship, or both. The most common outcome isn't a clean repayment. It's a quiet resentment on one side and a quiet avoidance on the other. The money doesn't just leave your account. It reprices the friendship. Now watch what that does to the math. Because the math is where this stops being a feeling story and becomes a wealth story. That $8,000 wasn't $8,000. Let me show you what it actually was. I was 29 when I lost it. If that same $8,000 had stayed invested in a plain, boring total market index fund earning roughly 7% a year after inflation, and I never added another cent to it, by the time I hit 59 it would have grown to just over $60,000. Read that again slowly. One number said out loud, in a moment of pride, to one trustworthy friend, quietly cost my future self $60,000, not 860. The gap between those two numbers is where compounding does its silent, patient work, and it works in both directions. It builds when you leave money alone, and it bleeds when you don't. This is the thing nobody explains about wealth. It isn't built in the moments you earn. It's protected or destroyed in the moments you disclose. Which brings me to the part that reframes everything. The part one only understood after the fact. I always assumed the people who talked openly about their money, who mentioned their raises and their good years and their savings, were the confident ones, the ones who'd made it. I had it exactly backward. Let me introduce you to someone I met later, a woman I'll call Sana. She was 44, worked as a regional operations manager, and by every visible signal she looked ordinary. Modest car, small house. She let people assume she was just getting by. For years, a cousin of hers treated her like the poor relation, occasionally offering to spot her for lunch. What that cousin didn't know was that Sana had a little over $600,000 across her retirement and brokerage accounts, built on nothing but a 15% savings rate held steady for 2 decades and never once announced. Her silence wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was insulation. Because she understood what I didn't. The moment your number is known, it generates a gravitational pull on everyone around you. And the only way to escape the pull is to never let the number form in anyone's mind in the first place. She wasn't hiding wealth out of greed. She was protecting the machine that built it. Because a savings machine only works if nobody keeps reaching in to grab a handful of the gears. Here's the part that gets stranger. The very thing that makes you want to disclose, the pride, the desire to be seen, is the exact emotion that wealthy behaving people learn to redirect. They don't kill the need for recognition. They just stop feeding it with their bank balance and start feeding it with something that can't be borrowed against. Sana got her recognition from being the person everyone knew was steady, reliable, unbothered, not the person everyone knew was liquid. Those are two very different reputations, and only one of them costs you money. Let me give you one more, because this pattern shows up at every income level. A man I'll call Bilal made great money, around $150,000 a year in sales. Big earner, big talker. He mentioned his numbers freely, his commissions, his good months. And Bilal was perpetually, bafflingly broke, always 3 weeks from a cash crunch despite the income. Part of it was lifestyle. But a bigger part, the part he never connected, was that everyone in his life knew he was the guy with money. His brother-in-law's business needed a bridge loan. A buddy's startup needed an angel. His parents assumed he had it handled. His disclosed income had turned him into everyone's backup plan, a human line of credit, and the constant small withdrawals meant the machine never got to compound. He earned more than Sana and had a fraction of her net worth. The difference wasn't income, it was noise. He broadcast, she stayed quiet. And 30 years from now those two choices produce 2 entirely different lives. If this is landing, take 1 second and subscribe, because this channel breaks down the real numbers behind money behavior every single week. Now, here's the part that separates the people who talk about money from the people who quietly build it, because understanding the trap is useless if you don't know how to stay out of it. The reframe is this: once you see the mechanism, the whole social picture inverts. The friend who tells you every detail of his finances isn't wealthy. He's leaking. The relative who lets everyone assume she's scraping by might be the most financially free person at the table. The loud ones are usually the ones with the least to protect, and the quiet ones are usually the ones with the most. You've been reading the signals exactly upside down your entire life, and so had I. So what do you actually do with this, in practical terms, starting today? None of it is complicated, which is the good news. First, adopt one rule. Your specific numbers are yours, not your income, not your savings, not your net worth, not the size of your raise. This isn't about lying. When someone asks, you can say you're doing okay, you're being careful, you're focused on the long game. All true, all vague. Vague is a boundary you can hold without a fight, and it's a boundary you build before disclosure, not after. Second, if you want to be generous, and generosity is good, decide the amount in advance and detach it from your total. Give what you would give if you had far less, so the gift is a fixed decision and not a function of what someone imagines you can spare. A person who thinks you have $5,000 asks differently than a person who thinks you have $500,000. Control the picture and you control the ask. Third, automate the machine so it runs in the dark. Set your savings to move on payday before you can touch it or mention it. Money you never see is money you never brag about. And money you never brag about is money that gets to compound in peace. Even $300 a month, invested and left alone at around 7%, becomes roughly $340,000 over 30 years. That's not a typo. That is the entire ballgame. And it happens quietly or not at all. Fourth, mute the feed. A 2023 study from the personal finance space consistently finds that social comparison is one of the strongest drivers of overspending. And the same instinct that makes you overspend to look wealthy is the one that makes you overdisclose to feel wealthy. They come from the same root. Starve that root. Get your sense of enough from your own trajectory, not from anyone else's highlight reel or anyone else's opinion of your balance. And fifth, keep the boring parts boring. A high-yield savings account for your emergency fund, currently paying somewhere in the 4% range as of 2026. A low-cost index fund for the long money. Automatic contributions. That's the whole calm corner of investing. And it's calm precisely because nobody's reaching into it. Trajectory beats position every time. Where you are today matters far less than the direction you're pointed and whether you can keep the gears turning without interruption. If this way of thinking is useful to you, the next thing worth watching is anything that builds your financial foundation from the ground up. Because disclosure is just one leak, and there are others hiding in plain sight once you know how to spot them. Let me take you back to where this started. Me, 29 years old, sitting across from a friend I trusted, proud of a number I'd earned one boring deposit at a time, wanting nothing more than for one person to see it and say, "That's impressive." I got my moment of being seen. It cost me $8,000 in cash, $60,000 in compounded future, and a friendship that slowly curdled into something we both learned to avoid. Danish did nothing wrong. Neither did I, exactly. I just handed someone the map and acted surprised when they walked to the water. The number was never the mistake. Saying it out loud was. Build quietly. Let the machine run in the dark. And the next time pride tells you to open your mouth about what you've saved, remember that the wealthiest thing you can own is a number nobody else knows exists.